Joining us now from Los Angeles is civil rights attorney and activist Connie Rice. She was a member of President Obama's task force on 21st century policing. With us here in Washington is the host and managing editor of TV1's News One Now, journalist and commentator Roland Martin. David Thomas is an associate professor at Florida Gulf Coast University. He's also a retired police officer and certified police trainer. He joins us from Gainesville, Florida. And with us from Los Angeles is the former LA police chief and current city councilman, Bernard Parks. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Chief Parks, let me start with you. You know, we just heard in Jim Spellman's report, the New York Police Commissioner Bill Bratton saying that recruiting more non-white officers into the force is challenging because most of them have criminal records. It seems to be a little bit of a vicious cycle here, but whatever the case, does Commissioner Bratton have a point?
Well, I think, first of all, I hope it was taken out of context because it reminded me of similar comments in the 70s where we couldn't find women because they were too small. And I think the issue is you generally, if you set your recruitment sites to populations that you're looking for and you think are important for your department, you generally can find success, particularly if you evaluate where they are falling out of the process. Years ago, black officers in LAPD fell out of the process because the medical exam disqualified them disproportionately because they had curvature of the spine, which no one ever related to being a deficiency. It's just that they had it. And so I think we have to look at why and begin to set in place particular kinds of programs to ensure that people can get through the exam as opposed to lamenting that we can't find them.
But did Commissioner Bratton have a point when he said that one of the problems is that many of the young black men that we want to recruit have criminal records?
Well, I think you could find that in every group, that people have criminal records. The standards are the same for everyone, and you can't get through the process without going through that process. And if you have felony records, you're going to be disqualified no matter what color you are. The issue is you find out if you're interested in a certain population of candidates, you will go through that process and determine what are the disqualifiers, and you'll find out where they're having difficulty, and you'll work towards correcting those.
Connie, looking at how policing is carried out in the United States, a former New York City Mayor, Rudy Giuliani, said last year in the wake of the killing of the young teen Michael Brown in Ferguson that white officers would not be in black neighborhoods if blacks were not killing blacks. He was making an attempt at explaining why there were so many white officers in black neighborhoods. I mean, one of the other things that he didn't say was that white people also mostly kill white people. What did you make of what Giuliani said?
It just sounded like more of his nonsense. That really is irrelevant. White officers are going to be in African-American communities, and so are African-American officers and Latino officers. I don't know what his point would have been. I think that the thing to think about here is that while a force that looks like the community that it's policing is an important factor, it is not the most important factor. The most important factor is the mindset of your officers and the style of policing. If you've got warrior policing that is predatory, that is rewarded for how many arrests they make, no matter how minor, that has dragnets, that traps most African Americans with fines like they did in Ferguson, that's predatory government, and it's a kind of search and destroy policing. That's what the community is up in arms about, and that's what needs to change.
David, is there evidence to tell us that law enforcement works better when police officers are from the same community, or if not from the same community, at least of the same ethnic color background?
No, there isn't. And historically, and I've been around the country, and people will always tell me we want police officers to look like us. The reality is, and I have to go back and agree with Connie, is that the reality is that it doesn't matter as long as they treat people like human beings and remember that they're human beings. So and historically, you can go back and you can look at minority officers, and oftentimes, especially in the years past, that they had a point to prove in order to stay in, to be accepted by their peers. And so as a result, you get the very same behavior that you would from the white officers who have had issues.
Roland, what is your view?
Well, that's a critical point. It's very interesting. When you listen to police officers, they always talk about how they need people in the streets, in the community, to talk with them about who commits crimes, who commits acts. But so this whole idea of no snitching. But do you know who has the greatest no snitching policy in all of America? Police departments. Because they never tell on one another. And so to his point, that's critically important because we have seen it, whether you're white or black, they protect blue. They protect the shield. So they're there to protect and serve, but they typically protect and serve themselves. And so what is required, though, is not just how do you reform the police department, but how do you get America out of this mentality of lock everybody up and throw away the key. You talk about community policing. Lee Brown was a former police chief in Atlanta, Houston, and also New York. Made it perfectly clear how you must interact with the community, how you must talk with people, because it's a give and take. When you have this adversarial relationship, where it's pretty much do whatever I say, do whatever I do, you do not question, then you have this tension that exists, and that's why people are at odds with police officers.
Chief Parks, is that the problem here? The problem is one of attitude. You know, as Connie pointed out, there is a warrior mentality when it comes to policing minority communities, not a guardian type of attitude from the police. So that needs to change first?
I think there's a lot of things that need to change. And, you know, when we think about the word community-based policing, it's been around for 40 years, yet people are still trying to implement it. So you get a sense that it's not institutionalized. The other issue, when you throw in these new issues such as stop and frisk and broken windows, and you use that as a means to arrest more people, it gets away from the whole concept of what community-based policing was developed. And if you look at the couple of the main theories of community-based policing, one was that you cause the officer that responds to calls have a relationship with the public. The other part was problem solving. You didn't go back to the same location and make 100 arrests. You actually got together and figured out with the community and other city departments, how do you solve that problem and not make it just a treasure trove of arrests. So when you get away from those two principles, and when you find that the community is saying they need a relationship with the police, they're really talking about the officer that responds to their call, not the guy or girl in a suit, not somebody that shows up after the fact. They're looking to say, how do I have a relationship with the person that's going to knock on my door and take action? And if you don't create that environment, and you have a split force of those who say, I do police work, and then you have another group that says, I do community relations, you will never get to community-based policing.
And keep in mind the DOJ report on Ferguson, when you had the police department essentially operating as a revenue producer, then exact same thing. You are not engendering, hey, we're in this thing together. It's all of a sudden like, oh, you're trying to sit here and make your payroll because of this. And so what you also have to have is, and this is what people have to understand, you also got to deal with some union contracts. City of Baltimore, for instance. Do you realize in the city of Baltimore, if you sue the police department, there's a cap on how much you can receive if you win. No other city in Maryland has that because the police department is so strong. In fact, the police chief in Baltimore can't even fire officers. And so we have to confront the fraternal order of police, how in many of these large cities, they pretty much from a union standpoint control that contract, and they have absolute authority. And Chief Parks can tell you, many chiefs say, look, I want to make changes. I'm handcuffed by the union contract.
Okay, let me go to Connie. Connie, looking at attitudes, and we just talked about that a moment ago, there was a survey done by the Gallup organization last year which showed that 1/3 of black people did not, or 1/3 only had confidence in the police force to enforce the law equally. That figure changes to almost 6 in 10, 60% for white people. So isn't that a disincentive for young black men to join the police force when they look at the attitudes that black communities have towards the police?
That is a disincentive, but I think a bigger disincentive is the fact that African American officers, if they feel good about their department and they feel their department is a good place to work, that they're doing the right kind of policing in their communities, those officers are your best recruiters. When you've got a lot of African American officers who are very ambivalent and don't want and discourage people from applying, that's the biggest barrier. But there's also a bigger issue here. I think that the profiling that people complain about really takes place at the community level. We get the policing we ask for. Police are asked to contain and suppress poor populations in the ghettos and in the barrios and in the reservations. That's what we ask police to do, and that's what they do. So I think that there is a bigger societal obligation to recognize that we ask police to do this stuff. We ask them to be warriors and contain the violence in poor areas.
But who's we?
Don't come, you know, don't come to Beverly Hills. Keep that stuff in Watts.
There you go.
Okay, let me bring David in. David, you've been a police officer. You now teach, you train police officers. Is there a problem here with, is there an image problem here, you know, in the manner in which police are seen by black communities?
Oh, absolutely. And that image problem goes back, we can go back to slave days and look at the slave patrols, and you can just move it forward. And even in the families, when you think about African-American deciding that he or she wants to be a police officer, their family members may well consider them as being traitors because of the relationship that law enforcement has had with the black community. So across the board, it's an issue. But the other thing that I'll say is that when you think about the culture itself, and the chief mentioned this, we have to change the culture of law enforcement. And it has to begin not just at the top, but it has to go all the way down to the bottom, and that has to be a buy-in. If there's no buy-in, then we continue to get what we have.
You got to keep on what Connie just said. When she talked about how you basically white communities expect the cops to take care of them, that's also what happens when all of a sudden an officer gets in trouble. And now all of a sudden a DA goes, oh, they have the right to charge them, but they'll send it to a grand jury. The grand jury oftentimes will say, no, we're not going to indict, because we have given cops so much wide leeway that pretty much now you can do whatever you want, and it's very rare you're going to get charged. The officer who was charged in Walter Scott's death, the only reason he has been charged and fired is because that was a video. Trust me, because remember, he lied in his report. So part of this problem is our society gives cops so much leeway that pretty much they're saying, I got carte blanche to do what I want.